on one second. Is your timer thing running? Does it say recording?
It does.
It says Mario is recording the call on my computer.
Okay, well, let's try it. My timer thing is not running again, so.
But it didn't run last time, right?
It didn't. But then I stopped it, and then we got that little fragment of a thing. So it says stop recording, so I'm assuming that it is recording. There it goes. Okay, so go ahead, Tammy.
Okay, so 2 new pieces of legislation are being pushed through as we speak. One is a pretty onerous gun law. Not that I disagree with everything that they're trying to do, but a lot of it's bad. A lot of it is very reminiscent of what Hitler did.
Like
before he disarmed the
Second Amendment rights, you're saying?
Huh?
Limiting Second Amendment rights?
Yeah, drastically. So, and then the other one, and this is really scary, is the tracing one. The tracing legislation, where they're $100 billion a year to hire people. And the way you find out about how it's going to be implemented, because the bill itself is primarily setting up all of these agencies and people and putting money out there to pay for basically a little,
so
call it what you will. I think of it as a little SS thing that's going to go around and force you to take COVID tests. And if you or anyone in your house tests positive, you'll need to be separated. Right. Now, I think it was either California or Washington. There was a mayor who said, "Oh, this is what we're doing." And I posted that video. And since then, Facebook, of course, has taken it down saying, "Oh, this is false." Well, no, the video was real and it was true. And they backpedaled because they got such a huge backlash after it happened. Say that again, honey?
That was Ventura County.
Yeah, Ventura County.
They took down the video of that county officer.
Yes.
Speaking? Really?
Yes.
They changed their minds, so they didn't want the wrong version out there. But what is Facebook being the arbitrator of what is real?
Right. Facebook and YouTube now, right? So you want to, and there's 2 new sites out, at least, that you can put videos on that are not, censoring them.
And what are those sites?
Huh?
What are those sites?
One is called BitChute, CHUTE, and the other one is called Alt something. It's on my Facebook page. It's Alt video. Or, as a matter of fact, it's funny. It's got a little, it's sort of got the YouTube red TV screen, but it's got a zipper across the mouth, and it's Alt, ALT. So they don't. They also do not censor, and so everybody who has anything that's remotely controversial is putting it on those 2 sites so that it can still be out there. And the fact is, this is what happened. This was a government agency saying, we're going to come to your home, you're going to take this test. If we think you're positive, and these tests are not reliable, well, they didn't say they're not reliable, but we know that they're not reliable.
False positives and false negatives.
We will monitor you. You will be quarantined. If there's more than one person in the house and the other person doesn't have it, they get out or you do. What the actual fuck?
So it seems like they're
setting. And by the way, we're taking all your guns too. I mean, it's like, there's no way. This is just.
Well, in the meantime, in the midst of all of it, Trump tries to slide in, a Department of Justice dismissal of the Flynn case, That
wasn't just him, though, I thought.
Sort of like while no one was looking.
Well, it's really Barr. Barr's the one who.
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, Trump. It's pretty much. That's got to be done in court.
There's a lot of controversy about which. It's like, again, every side has their set of facts. It's so strange.
Well, in relation to in relation to the guns, I can't say that I've ever been a huge, advocate of Second Amendment rights. Especially, I thought that I'm not a big Bloomberg fan either, but I think that Bloomberg had one of the more nuanced approaches to gun legislation, which was that, he always said that, if, and I think, my living out here now, I would be much more inclined, and especially if I were in an even more remote area, I'd be much more inclined to want to have a gun, right, for protection. But in the city, I think in particular, and this is what Bloomberg, kind of drew a differentiation on, was that there should be, it doesn't necessarily have to be one universal set of gun laws. There could be stipulations for gun laws in areas that have lower population density compared to areas that have higher population density, right?
That does make sense.
And that's one thing that one of his policies, that I always thought made a whole lot of sense.
It's a slippery slope any way you look at it.
One way or the other, right?
So you might as well have something reasonable that's slippery and unreasonable.
I think that when population density gets to be a certain point, I think guns start to make, proportionately less sense. Higher the population density, the less sense it makes for everybody to be able to have a gun.
I think so too. There's this wonderful story out of Texas where, a gunman came into a church in Texas and was going to blow everyone away because of some, love triangle or something. It was a wedding or something going on in the church. And he was going to, he was going to kill Bill it, And so everyone in the church was packing in Texas, right?
Oh, you told me about this. Yes.
He turned around and blew the guy away.
Right.
That's great in a Texas, rural church, but you wouldn't want that to happen on a New York City subway.
Not up in Harlem, no, exactly.
It would happen every day.
Right.
The car would blow somebody away.
Right.
And, and figure it out afterwards whether it should have happened or not, which probably not because it doesn't happen now. And even if someone is robbing people in there, it's just too dangerous to have the average person in New York City be packing.
Yeah.
On a bus or a subway, it just doesn't make any sense.
And it
I
works
can
in life.
totally understand that, but given the fact that the robber will have a gun.
Well, and that's true now, and there is more crime, but it's the same thing. It's this weird balance of freedom versus danger, and this is really the issue. It's one of the key issues of this whole corona thing, even though I think it's totally a sham. It's not really an issue, but that's the issue that's what they're trying to say is, like a gun, well, we have to err on the side of caution and safety rather than freedom. Well, and the Second Amendment is perfect for this. Again, and it's really, there is a parallel to with New York City. Density of population makes anything infectious more likely to be transmitted. It's clearly, if you have a terrible disease, then you don't want to be on the subway with someone who's got it. However, one thing I just can't understand, and I keep beating this dead horse, and I just do not understand how it's possible in the modern age that this information is not clear, that you cannot base the death rate on some bogus number of how many people have the disease. It's about just population. That's the only number that we kind of know, we believe that we think we know, is a population number. So a good measure of anything like this is the death rate per 100,000 population or something like that, or just the total death number and comparing that to other deaths. And when you look at the 100, at a rate based on population, it's really a flu number. It just is. Now, it could just keep going, and it could be a bad flu number, but it's still a flu number. It could be double and still be very, very bad as a flu, but really not worth fascism and global catastrophe, global economic catastrophe. I mean,
we had 100,000 deaths from the Hong Kong flu the year they had Woodstock. Nothing was shut down. That was just in the U.S., not worldwide, just here. 80,000, 2017-18 for that flu.
And that's the lesson. See, they should have shut down Woodstock.
Yeah. I mean, we didn't shut down anything.
Well, there were 80,000 deaths in 2018 from the flu alone.
That's what I'm saying, from the flu. And
these deaths that we're seeing now are mostly, they're just, the big number, that's the 80 or 90,000 now, is the number that includes all pneumonia.
Well, also almost all flu, because if you look at the CDC numbers, up in every year, right? Even 2 years ago, it was 80,000. I think last year it was 50 or 60, something like that. This year, 6,000.
Yeah.
How does that happen?
Well, and it's clear.
Right? 6,000 versus 60, even 30 on average, right?
And, you know,
so suddenly our flu is only 6,000. How does that even happen?
They admit it. If you read the fine print on the CDC thing, it says the big number includes the kitchen sink. But no one sees that. And then they compare it to the reported number of cases, and they come up with, 16% or 5% death rate. And yes, those are terribly scary numbers. It's just not real. Those are not the real numbers. Those are silly numbers. And to say, but the actual death rate based on population. So, for example, right now, New York State has 125, which is the highest. The country has 25 deaths per 100,000. 25 deaths per 100,000. So 1,000 is 1%. 100 would be 1/10%, and 10 is 1/100%. So 25, is 25 hundredths of a percent. I mean, is 2.5 hundredths of a percent. 2.5 hundredths of a percent is the current death rate. And here in Arizona, which is now one death higher than California, strangely, it's 8 in Arizona and 7 in California. California, which is the film industry is shut down forever. California, never probably coming back. There's no word when it's going to become normal because of 7 deaths per 100,000. So that's less than 1/100th. It's 7 1,000ths.
Do you think that, this is something that I was, sort of reticent to want to think about, but do you think that that is a result of the fact that Democrats see this as a leveraging tool to get Trump out of office, and they're going to keep this going until November, just to have sort of a stain on Trump's, sort of record in a way?
And
I think so.
The economy. I mean, you
think that's the whole motivation, Tammy?
I do. And I hate to say that, but I do. I mean, I'm an independent. I hate both sides equally. So it's not that I'm anti-Democrat. I also don't like the Republicans. Okay. So I think they both suck. So that said, this time, I think it's a Democrat thing because it's just too obvious. I mean, they're the one. I mean, Pelosi, Jesus Christ, get a clue, right? She needs to, I don't know, do something else. She needs a hobby. And even not just her, but just every opportunity. I mean, Trump is a tool. He should not be allowed to speak. I've said this before. But it's so overboard. It's so obvious. There is absolutely, I mean, he's not great, but he also has done some stuff that is not horrible, right? You never hear about that. Not ever. Whenever he does something that's, Well,
it's funny that he doesn't promote a few things.
He doesn't really either. Yeah. I mean, it's like.
He doesn't promote himself. It's so weird.
Stuff goes on that's actually not horrible. That's kind of like even stuff that has pissed a lot of people off. It's because they're being misled, at least in my mind, about the fact some of these trade deals that he's changed were never good for us. International business, that's my degree, right? This is the shit that I learned about. And even back when it was going on, I could have told you it was a bad idea because all of my professors, and they were all more on the liberal bent than the Republican bent. Some of them were, but I mean, that was not the point. They were business people. They were economists, and they were going, this just doesn't really match with human nature, and it's probably not going to work. And guess what? It didn't, right? So these things that he's getting us out of are not necessarily the worst thing, but you would never know that because you will never be given the facts in an easy, digestible way. You have to actually go search all that shit, read through all those documents. It's a fucking nightmare, right? And nobody who has time to do that except nut jobs like myself, right? So it's, so, uh, and so nobody gets the real information. And as near as I can tell, it's all slanted to like, get him out of here. And
there's so little real information to get. I mean, with everything,
it's true.
like NAFTA and the PPT, and I was a proponent of the PPT because I kind of like I'm a imperialist, So, but the thing is that in this context, you've got political information, which says, oh, this particular treaty is going to be this. And then you have the actual contract of the treaty, which is probably different than whatever it was promoted as. And then you have the reality of the execution of the treaty, which is very different still. And so whether something is good or bad, I mean, these things can all be debated. And whether Trump is doing a good job or a bad job in getting rid of them can also be debated. But I think what cannot be debated is that Trump is a fucking screaming moron. I mean, he's not a moron, but he acts like him. That's his character that he's playing, is a screaming, flaming moron that is a total disaster, I think, as the president of the United States. Even though I believe he's done several really good things, not everything, but he's done a couple. I mean, of all the hundreds of things he's done, I think a handful of them are actually good. So it's not like he's 100% dark and evil. He's just like out of his mind in terms of what his MO is absolutely insane. And of course, there's 30 or 40% of the population that think it's right on. So, who's got the crystal ball? I particularly feel that it's embarrassing that all the good things he's done and could do better things, way better things than the bad things he's done, everything could be so much better if he applied a sense of professionalism, so to speak, to the office.
Right? If he just wouldn't speak. That's the problem.
But it is so strange, it's like one of the key things he did was like with pedophiles, for example. That was a huge thing. Like they rounded up pedophiles in all the states, and it was a big thing that he did that, somewhere along the way, he did have something to do with it. And he could have taken, advantage of getting the PR for it. You'd think he would. He never tweeted a word about it, even though he, signed all the stuff for it. I particularly think that it's wrong to make it illegal to not have insurance, even though I would like to have insurance, and I would like everyone to have insurance. I don't think it should be illegal not to have it, per se. Yeah, so I do agree with that first thing that he did. I think that, something else should be done that's better or similar or different, than whatever Obamacare was. But we shouldn't abandon the concept of what Obamacare was trying to achieve. But I do think that they crossed the line with that particular part of it. It shouldn't be illegal to not have insurance, it just shouldn't be illegal, so to speak. But what is so strange is that the whole corona thing is completely political right now. In other words, if you're on the left side, then you're going to stay alive because you're wearing a mask. And if you're on the right side, then you're going to, maybe, not be imprisoned in your home and not wear a mask, and you're going to survive that way. But either way, I don't think it significantly is going to change these fractions of a percent of the actual numbers. I was watching the local TV the other day, and the guy was talking about getting tested. And this was a particular test for getting the antibody to see if you've ever had it. And he said there's like an expensive one that takes a long time, several days, and there's a cheap one, which you can do quickly, and they give you the results right away. And the results came back and said that he didn't have the antibodies. And this is a news anchor, and he went out on a limb and said, and I just know that it's wrong, because I am certain that I had this disease in February. Remember when I was so sick for like a week, and I had that cough and I had the fever, and it's when it all was coming out, and I'm just certain I don't ever get sick. So I'm sure that I had corona back then, and I'm sure that if I took the expensive test, it would say that I did. But this is just, to tell everyone out there that the cheap tests, don't always believe everything that, is happening with the tests, because it's possible, they admit it's possible they're wrong. And the cheap tests are, they admittedly
less
have
reliable than all of them. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and that's why this testing thing is a red herring, in my opinion, because the rates are so low. I mean, if somebody wants to wear a mask, they can wear a mask. I think it's great to wear a mask. I've known people with environmental disease who wore a mask all the time, and it's like, so what? If someone wants to wear a mask, in Asia they wear masks all the time, so wear masks. But to make it a political issue, to make a law about having to wear a mask in a condition where the death rate is relatively small, I mean, you have to argue that it's relatively small, even though it might even be double the size. It might be the worst flu we've had in a long time. It might be like the Hong Kong flu, or it might be worse than the Hong Kong flu. But it's not, like, it's not killing people like heart attacks do. It's just not worth destroying the economy, in my opinion. It's not worth destroying the economy and creating these very strange laws, potential for these laws that require you to be digitally fucking leashed and traced, and verified that you've got to take some test that you don't even know what the heck it is. I mean, to put it that way. If you were really afraid of catching a disease and you wanted to be tested, of course you'd line up and take the test. But then you wouldn't really have to mandate it, because everyone would want it, And,
well, I guess you're basing your comments on the assumption that human beings do the conscientious thing, whereas in reality, that unfortunately doesn't happen.
No, I mean, people are smart.
And it's the same thing. It's the same thing. You go back to the big gulp idea, right?
Right.
Anybody who's going to consume one or more of those a day, they don't want to know about the consequences of it.
Well, right.
And yet those consequences do have a broader, and should they have a right to do whatever they want to do with regards to their own body? Absolutely.
Yes.
And yet that action and those consequences are not limited to the individual. They spill over and become society's responsibility when people have diabetes and don't have health insurance, right? And so it's the idea of it as onerous as it sounds, and despite the slippery slope that it sets up, there's a territory there, there's a space there, right, that says that people are not going to necessarily do what's best for them. They're going to do the things that please them most for the moment, right? And that is not always necessarily something that works out for everybody else, right? The idea of responsible action is to understand when what is good for society is good for the individual, and when what is good for the individual is good for society, right? Having a big gulp every day is arguably not even good for the individual. It might be in the individual's desire to have, but it's certainly not in their best interest, and it's certainly also not in their best interest, in the best interest of society. But people don't act on those principles, right? And so that becomes where, that's why we got ourselves into the situation we got into with health insurance, because private companies, right, would not insure their employees because of the additional cost involved.
Right. Well, it's interesting, because maybe sugary drinks, and I'm not a proponent of sugary drinks at all. I never really drink soda, very rarely. And I certainly wouldn't drink a big gulp. I don't think I could. It's like I remember one time, I used to drink a lot of alcohol, but at one point I just really couldn't drink as much alcohol as I used to. And someone came over with a 40 one day of this like horse piss, crazy horse piss beer. And I was like, I just can't drink that. God, I'm not going to drink that.
Right.
It's poison. And a big gulp of some soft drink is hugely poisonous. So maybe ATF, needs to take over soft drinks. Because cigarettes are perfectly deadly.
That's another good example. Yeah, exactly. And yet New York cracked down on that too. And I've got to say that it's enhanced my, dining and bar experience, because I would go into bars, first of all, I would avoid them, but if I did go into them, and they were particularly smoky, I would just get sick.
Yeah. I'm very, I've smoked a lot of things, but I've never really smoked tobacco. I've never been able, I can't tolerate tobacco. So
Yeah.
it makes me very ill, like immediately. And even secondhand smoke makes me just feel terrible. It was funny, a friend of ours in LA is a member of a club, private club, doesn't even have a sign. You have to kind of go down a basement and upstairs and across a catwalk and climb a ladder and into this, go along the ledge of a building and then climb through a window to get into this club. And it's a very nice high-end club. It's got a top shelf bar and everything. And it's a smoking club. And you've got to have the password to get in and stuff. And it was weird to be in a smoking club, because you've really forgotten what it was like to be in, except in Vegas, you're kind of reminded. If you ever go to Vegas, they still allow smoking in the casinos. But those are huge spaces. When you go to a little dark bar and it's thick with cigarette smoke, it's not a healthy environment. But neither is a dark bar in general a healthy environment for several reasons. So again, it's like, can you say, well, let's just not go to these bars? I think a restaurant is a terrible place to have smoke everywhere. But I think,
Airplanes.
Airplanes, obviously, when you're trapped, do you want to go to a dark bar and have the ability not to breathe smoke? Yes, I love dark bars, but dark bars are dark bars, and there's another element to it. Like, why can't you have a smoking area in a dark bar? And again, I don't smoke, so I'm not really promoting it. I'm just saying there's got to be a way to still have the pursuit of happiness, even in the event when you want to preserve the well-being of the population, while at the same time allowing for individual freedoms. And that's the balance, of course.
And that's right. And there's the rub, as the bard would say.
And so it's always going to go this way and that way. I mean, you had prohibition, and then that didn't quite work out because people just want to get fucked up, and that was what they missed. They missed that people just are going to drink alcohol, even though it's bad for you. And people are going to smoke cigarettes way after they should have stopped because they want to. And can you save people who don't want to? Alcohol is different because, if someone's drinking next to you, you're not really going to get a contact high.
Well, right. See, that's the interesting thing, right? Alcohol and cigarettes make a good parallel comparison there, right? Because, you could argue that being drunk, even though it doesn't have the immediate effect of like secondhand smoke, but you have you have some of the ancillary consequences that, for example, the women's temperance movement was interested in addressing, like domestic violence, right?
Right, and also people killed. Now it's traffic accidents.
And traffic accidents, right? Exactly.
Just general boorish rowdiness.
Right. Which are things that have never really been associated with. I mean, maybe now that it's becoming more more proliferated, we'll start to study these things, and maybe there'll be a correspondence. But people that smoke marijuana have never really been associated with perpetuating domestic violence, for example, right?
No, they don't want to get off the couch. They just want to get into the kitchen.
Yeah. Right.
But that brings up a really interesting.
You do still have the issue of the secondhand smoke, right? Not
if you do edibles. I mean, I haven't tried. I wanted to try that. I haven't tried that yet. But.
Yeah, exactly. It's different. There is more of a body sensation than
it's a good thing, really.
Than head sensation. Yeah.
Yeah. But we know people who take it medicinally who just don't want to smoke anymore, so they take edibles.
Right.
And it's just a way of, they wouldn't want to not have their dope, to smoke, but they don't want to smoke anymore. So they have edibles, and luckily it's really not a big deal anymore.
Right. Now, see, there you go. Right. So that's maybe a better example, because then there's no secondhand smoke. And then the effect on the personality of being under that influence, does that have a detrimental societal impact? Right. And to the point of them sitting on the couch, you'd say, well, they're not productive. Right. Well, and maybe more inclined to lethargy and indolence. Well, but then you're imposing the value. But then you're imposing the greater value, the greater values of saying that it's better to be productive.
Well, and that is a slippery slope.
And is that the case, right? I mean, one of the things that all of this corona isolation has kind of brought out to me is that we don't have to, and I agree with Tammy that I don't like the fact that it's forced, but that forced aspect, right? Sometimes you just got to shove somebody's face in this shit, right, to get them to understand, right? And under these circumstances, the fact that we've been forced into this isolation has kind of brought, at least to me, brought out the fact we really don't need a lot of the stuff that we think we've always had to have. Fossil fuels, right? The high degree of consumption of fossil fuels, we don't have to do it, right? And everybody, how do you protect the environment? Well, you stop using fossil fuels. Oh, we can't. Well, we just did, right?
But at a big, and it is a big economic change. So, to me, that is someone's agenda to achieve those goals. For example.
Plus, during this whole thing, we've almost wiped out the middle class. If they keep going, they will wipe out the middle class.
Right.
They'll be pretty much the high class, a teeny weeny bit of middle class, and everybody else will be fucking poor.
Right. Who can afford to isolate, whether it's their second home or a yacht or wherever, and the people who absolutely have to be physically interactive in groups to eke out, a subsistence living. Yes, that is true. Not necessarily, but again, not to my view, not a necessary consequence of all of this, but maybe a planned one, because again of the demographic that this, it's also not necessary, it's not incidental to me that once it became apparent that lower income folks were being disproportionately affected by this, that the whole tone seemed to change from isolation to reopening, and almost to the effect of it's like, well, oh, I see, that one group of people, that one particular demographic is the one that's disproportionately affected by this. Oh, in that case, let's go back to work. Especially in urban areas. And that's why I think our experiences are qualitatively different, right? Because you guys live in a much more sparsely populated, geographic region. And so the density, has a different impact on the result,
Where we are is like a lighter version. It's like the lightest version of Queens.
Say again?
Where the kind of thing that we live in is like where Queens kind of turns into Long Island. Like that's the density. It's pretty close houses,
But it's not like hundreds of people in one building.
No.
Like we have apartment complexes here too, and condos and stuff, but not like New York. It's not crazy, anthill living like New York tends, or termite. With all the things and 9 gazillion 100 million people living in one place, it's not like that, so
neighborhoods of houses too.
And I think that makes a qualitative difference, because even the houses, I mean, we're in out here in Long Island, we're not like, it's a rural community, I would say. We're not totally rural, like with hundreds of acres, and the next neighbor, is further than a gunshot away kind of type thing. It's not that sparsely.
Have you tried?
I don't even have to try. It's not that sparsely populated, but it makes a huge difference, right? I mean, Southold, the area we're in, had one of the highest degrees of, per capita, like you're saying, per 100,000 population instances, almost even more than Manhattan, or as much as, if not more than Manhattan. Still, we decided to come out. We decided to come out here because we could self-isolate out here, whereas in Manhattan, self-isolating was way more difficult.
Well, you probably brought it.
Well, that's what folks were saying too. Obviously, for people that were migrating out of the city. I mean, I know for a fact that we didn't, because when we came out here, we isolated immediately, and it was more than 2 weeks, and we were fine. We were fine more than 2 weeks before we came out, and then we were fine 2 weeks subsequent to our coming out here. So it wasn't enough. But people that knew that they were sick, there are cases though where people that knew that they were sick left the city to go to Florida, even Long Island, Connecticut, wherever, right? And were the sources of further infection. Yes.
Well,
and I think that's irresponsible. That's irresponsible.
Well, is it irresponsible if you have the flu to leave your house? Because 80,000 people just 2 years ago, nobody gave a shit.
I don't think it's irresponsible to leave your house. I do think it's irresponsible to sneeze on the subway and not take some, just sneeze right off.
Well, that would be irresponsible anyway.
Yeah, I mean,
exactly. So I mean but that's what I'm talking about. But see, you can't. But there are people that do that, and then you go like, dude, I have students, that will cough and sit in the front row and cough. I'm like, you can't sit in here and cough like that. I'm sorry. If you do that again, I'm gonna have you removed, right? And just under normal circumstances.
And I think it's always been true. If someone's
I don't want my whole classroom sick. I don't want to be sick, and I don't want to make my whole classroom sick because students came to my class and then they got sick because of some irresponsible kid. I'm never going to allow that, right?
No, it's always been true. It's always been true. Every flu season, if someone's really sick, you got to get them out of the class.
Yeah, but yet there's all, and then if you tell them that, it's like, look, dude, you got to cover your mouth. Why I got to cover my mouth? Well, mind your own business, right? You can't. I mean, in my classroom, I'm in control and I can do that, right? But I mean, if you say that to somebody on the subway, cover your mouth when you cough, cover your mouth when you sneeze. Fuck you, right? It's like it's the first.
Right.
But
walk in here. But that's that's the way it is.
Over here, I'm coughing, yo. So how?
But that's just bad manners that should have been taught in school, frankly. I mean, my parents taught me to cover my mouth when I cough or sneeze or whatever from birth, right? Because your parents would smack you in the fucking head if you didn't do that, right? Cover your mouth.
But see, you're not allowed to do that anymore.
But it's always been potentially deadly. If you're on the subway and there's an old grandma next to you, and you've got a nasty version of the flu that's flying around here, and you cough and sneeze on her, and she gets it, and she dies 2 weeks later, that happens. That happens. That's the flu. That happens all the time in flu season. If everyone at an old folks home knows, you better go visit grandma at the beginning of flu season because there's a chance she'll be cold. Every year that happens. It's interesting though about this isolating in place, because it brings up something else that we were talking about earlier. And a Far Side cartoon, one of my favorite Far Side cartoons, is 2 panels. And one of them is a business person. There's a clock behind them and everything's angular. And there's piles of paper and he's very busy. He's working. And the other panel is someone relaxing under a palm tree on a desert isle. And the 2 captions are productive and wasted life. And then what it brings up really is that the person who has to work because they don't have enough money not to is productive maybe, and the person who can relax on the beach and doesn't have to work because they have a lot of money is not productive,
right?
Or was productive, or someone was productive at one point, So, and then there's the whole Zen thing, what is really life about, So when we begin to legislate what is a productive life and what is not a productive life, I mean that's way slipperier than even the Second Amendment stuff, because there's no logic to even draw to.
It's like the homeless thing that we were talking about, I mean, some people just want to be homeless. They don't want to have a home. We have a very well-off friend of ours who had a home and, or was a condo that he owned, and it became too much of a thing. He went back to renting because that's
like an albatross. To own is to be tied down, and they have more of a sort of a more of a wanderlust kind of spirit.
That's right, and he didn't, is so.
And that's fine if it's a choice, right? It's fine if it's a choice. Yeah.
But is it? It is fine if it's a choice, right? Because it is, because we have all kinds of forests around here. And by God, if you want to go live out in the forest, as long as you're not burning it down and killing Smokey the Bear or whatever out of season, you're okay. And you should be allowed to do that because they're public lands. You're not hurting anybody. Go eat wild carrots if that's what you want to do, right? We got lots of land you can do that on. But
People don't have the skill
but
set.
this path we're going down right now, and the don't drink sugary drinks and whatever, I mean, I don't like sugary drinks myself. I don't give two craps. But if Bubba over here wants to have a freaking big gulp every day, I don't care. It's not my body. It's not my
when
business.
you make less money because you have to pay for his hospital bills and his kidney transplant.
But we do the same thing with
that's right.
Well, we do that with cigarettes. We
and alcohol.
Yeah, exactly.
And alcohol and salt. And where does it stop? Where does it stop? You like to lay in the sun. Guess what? Skin cancer is a problem. So no, now I'm going to limit your time in the sun to only 20 minutes a day. It can only be from 9 to 11 because that's the only safe time. And after that, you better be inside, and we're going to put a little ankle bracelet on you to make sure you stay inside.
But maybe that's why universal health care is so important, right? Because then it's almost that law almost is one sort of underpinning law, which then makes other choices more flexible and free, right? Because if you have insurance, then if you want to give yourself diabetes, knock yourself out. It's not an extra cost to society as a result, right?
But again, you're saying it's one size fits all. One size doesn't fit all. Maybe I don't want universal health care. Maybe I don't need it, right? Maybe what I need is whatever my company provides. Or maybe I'm filthy freaking rich and I want ABC insurance. I should be allowed to have it. But for those people who need insurance, or healthcare, right? Healthcare options, those people who need it, who want it, who cannot afford it, there should be a place for them to go and get it. Maybe on a really cheap sliding scale or a free scale. It should be something having to do with Medicare that already exists, right?
You were very ill for a while.
Yeah.
And you had corporate insurance. You had
really good insurance.
Plant insurance.
Yeah.
And it was like the best insurance you could get. But you were sick for a long time.
Yep.
You almost died, as I understand it. And you went bankrupt because the insurance wasn't really good enough, even though it was the best insurance you could have.
It's true.
What, the deductibles are what got you?
You know what happened? I had
and you were making a good living.
I was making a good living. I had it was either Blue Cross Blue Shield and I went to United, or the other way around. And whatever it was, when I first got sick, when it was really expensive, I was on an 80-20 plan. And I didn't have a very big I didn't have a super huge deductible, so it kicked in right away. But when you're going to the,
if you have you can rack up $100,000 of healthcare bills in a heartbeat, and 20% of that is $20,000, and it's a big chunk of change.
Yeah, and I was a single parent at the time, and then as soon as I realized that I wasn't getting well. I mean, for the first year, I was really sick, and I just kept going to the doctor and the hospital and getting surgery and all kinds of bullshit, and I was on tons and tons of medication. And the second year, the same thing was true, but I was working again, and so I was able to, be coherent again. I mean, I was 5 months literally unable to leave my bed, so I was very ill, and
no one ever figured out what it was.
No, they just said it was some sort of autoimmune issue that turned my immune system on full blast, but the thing my immune system wanted to kill was me. So it went after my heart and my liver and all kinds of everything. And so it was bad.
It's just me sometimes.
Yeah, it's just bad all the way around.
Well, apparently
And
that's how
so
COVID
now my
works
immune
in the
system's
lungs.
very
Apparently that's how
kick-ass.
COVID works in the lungs.
Um, yeah, I guess so. This was my MS is not um, genetically transferable, but my grandmother had MS, and so apparently, and I found this out way after the fact, that autoimmune difficulty can be genetically transferred. So I had actually a bad flu. And I was in, it's funny, I was in really good shape, but I was under a lot of stress at work. And so I was constantly battling those stress poisons that you put out when you're in a lot of stress. And so it was able to attack me. And then my autoimmune system just went, you know, let's kill her. And so but what I was going to say is eventually then I changed my insurance to a 90-10 insurance, which was actually much better. And but by that time the damage was done, because there was 2 or 3 years where, you know, it was just the last fucking thing on my mind. I got to tell you, you know, making it to the next year was like pretty high priority for me. And then, you know,
when you do the 90-10, then your premiums go crazy.
Yeah.
Oddly not through my work. At that time, they just didn't, right? It was only slightly different. Maybe it was $50 a month. It wasn't much worse, but you know, I was a penny pincher, a single mom, you know, and I made good money at the time. So when I went 90-10, I mean, now since Obamacare came and fixed everything, now the premiums are just berserk. There's no way to get good insurance unless you're a gazillionaire. But at that time, I got it through APS, right? So I paid part of it and they paid part of it. And it wasn't so bad. I mean, I didn't pay that much. I was less than $300 a month. I got paid every 2 weeks, and I paid just over 100, I think, maybe even less per paycheck. It might have even been less than 100. I can't remember, but that included everything, right? That included dental, eye insurance, health insurance, accidental death and disability, and life insurance.
Oh, wow.
And I don't think I paid $100 a month. I mean, it just wasn't, or I mean, $100 a paycheck. I think it was less than that. It was maybe like $150 a month. Now that I think about it, I think it was like $75 a paycheck. And at the time, I felt like that was pretty outrageous.
Right.
And you know, now wouldn't we just love to be able to pay that, right? And I remember when I separated from the company, I had to start paying. I paid Cobra to continue my insurance for another 8 months or 18 months. Sorry, and it was $3.99 a month or something like that, which I felt was just outrageous. But you know, I got a package, so I could afford it. But I didn't want to spend that much a month, you know, to pay for that. But you know, I did everything I needed to at the time. I mean, I did everything, every health thing I could imagine that I thought I would do, dental, eye stuff, you know, physical things. And by then
we pay over $1,000 a month.
Holy shit.
Yeah. For the whole family, right?
I used to pay
four people in the family. What's that, Russ?
In the 90s through Sony, great insurance, I used to pay $250 a week, but included everything in the kitchen sink, everything you talked about, plus, you know, acupuncture, all these things, and 100% coverage. So it was really great. You know, there is one thing that no one ever talks about, which I think is really important with regard to the COVID thing, and that is vaping. So, you know, there was, I don't know if you were following it. They were just recently starting at the end of last year and everything. You know, I read the New England Journal of Medicine, and they were freaking out because of this vaping illness that was.
All those people were dying. Yeah, right.
Yeah, those people were dying. And when we're on a movie set, every single person is vaping, pretty much.
Not us.
The majority of people are vaping. When you go
the younger people are all vaping.
Yeah. And if you go, like, not into a bar anymore, but if you go into a, you know, if you're at a place where people are privately partying, most people are vaping, you know? And it's, so I can't believe that some part of these, you know, young person corona deaths are also part of this vaping thing. I mean, I know that one of the funny
Well, they
things is,
did say that it does make you more susceptible. I did see a couple of things that,
sure,
that said
I
that
believe it.
you should,
but this
if
vaping
you
thing,
vape under these circumstances, you should stop.
right? And vaping was its own disease. I mean, it was
Yeah,
killing people,
right.
maybe because of this vitamin E thing or whatever it
Well, their
was.
lungs were collapsing or something like.
Right. Well, there was a story I read about, oh, here's a healthy person. Yeah, they were melting. Their
Yeah,
lungs were literally like just disintegrating. It's
yeah.
very strange. And it was a story of a healthy person who died of corona. You know, they're 38 years old, you know, they're big, they're healthy, they're meaty. It's like, what could be wrong with them? Except, well, they were a DJ uh, doing specifically Bob Marley stuff, you know, all the time.
Uh-huh.
So I'm sure the guy smoked like a chimney, you know? And so it's not fair to say that he's totally healthy, you know, when he's a Rastafarian DJ. You know, it's just, you know, it's just that's something that's important to take into account, I think.
Right.
And you see that a lot, you know, when, I mean, people are dying. It happens. They die in flu season. And I think the way these numbers are going, this is a very bad season. Let's put it that way.
Well,
But
and it's hard.
those are still numbers within the concept of a flu season.
It is. And it's hard. The one thing that just makes me so crazy is what did they say, that the heart attacks have gone down by 87%?
Yeah, right. We talked about that before. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like all of these numbers that we're looking at, they're just so much bullshit.
But you know, the reason why we were using so much oil is because we wanted to as a society.
Yeah.
And, you know, and also the society wanted us to use oil because there was so much money associated with it. And, you know, I mean, so many people had made, you know, all this middle, you know, the middle class thing. So many people had made their lives out of these industries that are now collapsing. I mean, the oil industry, you could argue, was never a great industry. Sure, it was a powerful industry. Sure, it created, I mean, being able to drive somewhere. Now, New York, you know, again, you don't have to drive in New York. You just don't have to. Most people don't even want to have a car in New York or just don't have one. But almost everywhere else, you have to have a car to participate in society. I mean, you had to have a car in order to participate in society. And I think it's cool that now we never have to ever see each other in person again. But you have to ask yourself, is that really where we're going? Is that the
And it's not healthy.
That's not exciting to me. That's kind of sad because of the loss of the human contact thing.
It will kill us in the end. It will make us weaker in the end. And they know that, because the reason you have good, healthy immune systems is because your body has to fight shit off, because you're going to be exposed to your neighbor who has cooties, right?
That's
Who
why
knew that we learned everything we needed to in kindergarten about avoiding cooties, but cooties are what saves you.
Like mongrel dogs are healthier than purebreds, right?
Exactly.
Purebreds have susceptibility to a lot more types of disease.
Eat more dirt.
Well, exactly. I mean, people need that. People need other human contact to feel okay. And, you know, you're lucky, right? You're there. And Rusty and I are lucky because we have each other. But there are people right now who are, you know, self-isolating by themselves in their home, fucking alone, and it's wrong. And this whole thing I've seen now coming up of the public shaming. Like, I don't know if you saw that. I posted that. Yeah, you should public shame people that aren't wearing a mask.
Is the one that started it, right? De Blasio is the one that started it. He started by, you know, saying that you should report people, you know, who are congregating or you know, not practicing, you know, whatever the protocols are.
Right. That's Orwellian.
That's yeah.
It's just not right.
He's another one that should just not talk from time to time.
Exactly. Well, I put Cuomo right up there with him. And both of them.
Cuomo is a little more interesting, although I got to say, when he said that the unemployed should just become tracers, that got me like a little.
It should make you nervous.
Tweak. Like, my wife's unemployed, right? She's an architect. She's gonna become a tracer. Like, you know what I mean? That totally
right.
disrespectful to the training. I mean, if somebody wants to become a tracer, go for it, man. Be a tracer. You know what I mean? But that shouldn't be that shouldn't be the the solution to the high unemployment is like make everybody a tracer now.
Well, I
Well,
used to
that's
be,
how you keep your people in line, though, isn't it? Because they need an army, and that's the terms that they're
Maybe I'll be a
using, an
tracer.
army to
I'm a
do this
tracer.
tracing.
Maybe I will do that.
huh,
Because if we become tracers, then we can trace ourselves and we'll know how that's going and nobody will trace us.
so it's like proactive tracing.
Yeah.
I think what we need to do is not allow that law. It hasn't gone through yet, and yet there are there are states and areas and states that are implementing it, but that is not a law yet, but they are trying to make it a law, and we do not want it to become a law because then you are a cog and you have no more say. And I mean, if you don't like Nazism, this is not the direction you want to go in. My dad grew up in it. This is not what you want.
We can't let people vote away their freedoms because they can't vote them back.
Right.
Yeah.
And so this is something that people need to really realize. And I don't think that everyone does, it seems to me,
Well, again, we talked about Brexit one of the previous times, and I mean, there you go, right? People were voting, for Brexit, and then going to Google what they just voted for.
Right.
And they were voting on some kind of spontaneous emotion or some reactive feeling, to something, and not really looking at the substance of what it was from the beginning, right? And then they vote, and then they go, well, maybe I should look up what I just voted for. And going, what? I just voted for that?
But this has been the argument, but this is the core of political science, thinking for the longest time is should people have the right to be free because they're not really qualified to make political decisions.
Well, and who determines who's qualified?
Well, exactly. But that this is an issue. This is why there is royalty and why there are despots, because the people don't know. I know the people don't know. But America was this experiment that they gave it a shot, and it seems to work, even though it's quasi true. But it's a working model of the concept, and I think that we shouldn't abandon it yet. Because we're looking. What are we really looking at here? We're looking at California saying they have no end date for any of this based on 7 deaths per 100,000. 7 deaths per 100,000. They are on the verge of enacting fucking martial law. So what on earth is happening? And are we going to say we now live in a society where we must social distance, we will wear masks because the world is just too dangerous a place, and we just cannot drive cars because that's dangerous and it pollutes, and we can't do all these other things because really it's just too dangerous or it's just too detrimental, and we just have to stay in caves with masks on and be glad that
find responsible, sustainable things to do, right? I mean, American Indians didn't have this problem, indigenous people.
American Indians fought and killed each other, and if you don't believe that, look
No,
up.
that's true. They had territorial
the
disputes.
Lakota.
They had territorial disputes, but they never behaved in such a way that, for example, they never hunted, for example, and they never harvested. Like out here in Long Island, oysters were a big thing, but they never over harvested the oysters. They always knew that there was some degree of harvesting of the oysters that they could not go beyond without endangering the sustainability of going back and using those oysters, right? Same thing with arable land, right?
There just wasn't enough of them.
You don't just go and cut down every single tree that you can see, right? They used just as much as they needed, and they let the rest be.
Well, we could wipe out a good portion of the population and the same thing would happen because there just wasn't that many of them. I mean, I've read a lot of books, and I'm sure you have too, by Indians, by Native Americans, who say that this whole thing about Native Americans were always just so fabulous and they knew this and they knew that. Yes, some tribes did. Guess what? A lot of them didn't. And if they had a cliff and a bunch of buffalo, they'd run them all off no matter how many they needed. And eventually they would stop and they would take what they could. But also they wasted a lot. This is coming from books by Indians about Indians. So it's just what we've been taught, but it's not necessarily always the truth.
Well,
now maybe that's just on the western part of the country.
That is then why is it that since the Industrial Revolution,
because there's more of us.
It's only been since the Industrial Revolution, and what made more of us, right? What's made more of us, right? What's made more of us is the illusion of prosperity, which gives us the false sense that we can expand indefinitely and continue to consume increasingly more, right?
True, but our population right now, is like just about, our population growth right now is about zero most of the time.
Yeah,
right? There's enough people die and fewer people are
because
born.
There's no more place to expand.
Well, and that's what I'm saying, though. I mean, I think a natural kind of thing.
But you're talking about the United States, Kim.
And we're
in the United States.
Right. So that's the issue, right? The population has leveled off, but it's never in the United States. It's never been so much of a pressure to increase the population, except when we were a very young country and needed to have personnel for armies and whatnot. But the process of capitalism is only functional if you increasingly consume increasingly more.
It's cash flow
to continue production, right?
Well,
and that's why nothing is sustainable, right? You buy something and it's and there's obsolescence built into it. You know what I mean? Indigenous subsistence living, if you made something, you wanted to make it last as long as possible because it took so much time out of your ordinary other survival tasks, right? Because you don't have to make a spear every day, right? It's like I have a spear, I'm going to use it, I'm going to make the best spear I can, I'm going to use it as long as I possibly can, right? Designed obsolescence is
toxic.
Yeah,
I mean,
I agree. Well, even in the Industrial Revolution, a lot of the stuff wasn't. I mean, I'm sure if you go back and you get an old, when I had my house, I had an old refrigerator that was refurbished. It was an old refrigerator when they fixed it, right? And that damn thing lasted 20 years, right? It was a good refrigerator because they built it to last when they built it. They didn't build it to break. They built it to last. And so, and of course now, like you say, things are built in.
We had a great refrigerator, right? And then we had this warranty on it. And then like a week after the warranty expired, it broke down.
See?
Well, that's how it is.
Planned it.
And that's ridiculous. It doesn't have to.
It's gone too far.
Right, exactly.
The problem is cash flow. I mean, capitalism is really cash flow. And when you're starting a business or you're starting your busy season, and you're increasing your cash flow and you're on terms, then of course you've got cash pouring in and you're paying less than you're bringing in. So it's like, woo, it's party. But when that thing turns the corner and now you're having less sales, but you're having to pay for everything when it was high, now you're in trouble. And now it seems like you're going to go out of business. So obviously we all know the quarterly results driven current economic concepts, are really not the best thing for people. But the problem is, I mean, you're familiar with the standing stones in the Georgia standing stones. Do you know what I'm talking about? Mm-hmm. So somebody erected like a monolithic structure that's designed to look like it's ancient, and I think it's in 4 languages on 4 sides. It's quite large. It's like an obelisk of sorts, and a panel-ish obelisk, and it has 4 different languages, I think. And basically, it lists these kind of like commandments. And one of them is there should only ever be no more than 500,000 people on the earth. That the earth can't sustain more than that.
Wow.
So, it's somebody's idea of a joke, but it's a pretty good joke. No one knows who really did it. There's some ideas, but one of the people they're fraudulent pseudonyms and stuff. So no one really knows who put it up.
Banksy.
And it's pretty amazing. And I'm sorry, who did it? Banksy? Yeah.
No, I'm kidding, of course.
Oh, I see. Oh, you didn't. And so the problem is that right now, right now we can not use oil because we have built a society. So, and we can't, we don't have to develop an internet because we have one. So if we don't need to develop things, then we don't need to do the things that got us the developments that we have. But to me, that seems like atrophy.
No,
Well, there has to be a
we have
balance,
to find
right?
a new way of developing, right? And so, for example, when I was considerably younger, the first real documentary project I did was a documentary about hydroelectric plants in rural Colombia, right? And what they did and so they wanted to bring electrification to the countryside, right, to the rural countryside through hydroelectric dams. But when they were doing the construction of the hydroelectric the design of the system of dams that they needed to construct, they factored in, and this is the one thing that I didn't press them on, but I have this guy who was in charge of the project talking on tape, right, about the fact that they created a formula for human profit and for human resource capital. And they factored that into the design of the overall project, right? And that's the kind of thinking that I think has to become, and that's the whole reason I did that project, right? I did that documentary specifically because of that one concept, right? That human profit, that there's a type of profit that's not just monetary. There's a social profit, a psychological profit, and an emotional profit that also has to be factored in. Just like Ivan Illich's notion of shadow work, right? That big corporations, right? And somebody in the New York Times, for example, there was a New York, it's on my Facebook page, that somebody tried to go back, almost like slave reparation, right? Somebody went back and tried to calculate the value of women's work to corporate culture, right, since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, and it comes to something like over $10 trillion, right, that the work that women do to support the superstructure of corporate capitalism, but not get paid, right? And nor does corporate capitalism recognize that activity as of any value, right? And yet it is of value, right? And that's just women's work, right? Then you got, on top of that, you got reparations for slavery. On top of that, you have just the sheer cost of the fact that corporations use roads like the rest of us do, but each of us pay for that. The corporation doesn't really pay for the amortization of the social capital that it consumes and is probably the greatest part of destroying, right, of wearing out, right? The way that corporate culture uses rivers and air and land and never really pays for the real value of those materials, right?
Absolutely.
You got to factor all those things into it. Just like now, right? And it goes. The thing that is most analogous to in our current experience is data mining, right? I don't mind if people mine my data. What I would want, right? I do mind that they mine my data and don't give me anything for it.
Right.
Use my data, right? But every time you use something that came from data that you got from me, give me a penny.
But they do give you something for it. And there are websites that do that. There's a thing called Brave that is trying to do that sort of thing, and there's some other you can earn.
No, but it should be a policy, right? If they can, if Sprint knows that tomorrow my bill is due and sends me a fucking annoying reminder of the 20 more odd years that I've been a Sprint customer that I've never not paid my bill, right? And it still give me all these annoying announcements. They could give me a penny back for every time they could program that in, right, to their analytics, right? That gives me a penny back for every time they use my data.
Right.
Anything related to data they got from me and you and Tammy and the rest of us, give us a penny back.
Well, in the grocery stores, the loyalty cards, they literally make more money from selling your data than they do off the margin from the product being sold.
Sure, right? Sure.
And
I think recycling would work. Recycling would work if we were given an economic. There's certainly industries that are making money off of our recycling, but every time I take a big bag of empty, water bottles, I don't drink soda either, but water bottles to recycle, I don't get anything from it. Separating the metals from the cardboard, I don't get anything for that. And yet it's an industry that somebody's making a profit off of.
Yeah, I know a company that makes.
And I'm doing all the fucking work.
Yeah, it's somebody's.
Yeah,
that's
exactly.
That'll work, right? And that's value, and that can be programmed into. We can use programming and coding to sort of pick and choose. Like when I'm looking up how to make a bomb, right? They'll figure that shit out in a heartbeat and be at my door, but they can't figure out that I'm recycling and give me something back to encourage me to keep doing it.
Well, that was one of the things that's coming up on Facebook, right? They're saying now Facebook can figure out and YouTube can figure out when you're putting out a news story that they don't like anymore, but they can't stop child pornography.
Right.
Really?
Well, because it's political.
It's actually getting worse there, because now I never used to get like sort of solicitations on Facebook, but increasingly there are all these like friend requests, and I go and there's like it's a
bot.
Yeah.
Well, you know what I've been doing on the ads that come through? I mark them if it's something that, because we get so much COVID bullshit all the time. It's just like, so every time I see one of those, I mark it as I report it. I don't say to hide it. I report it, and I say it's misleading or a scam or offensive. So I figure at the very least it's got to annoy them, because when you report it, they have to do something about it.
Right.
So at the very least, I'm a thorn in their side. It's like, you're going to take down the shit that I'm not posting anything that's wacky and crazy. I'm posting real stuff that happened on the real news of real people saying really heinous shit. And you don't want everyone else to know about it. That's not my problem. Well, except that it is, because they're like, no, this is false. No, not false. They said it. It happened.
And
this is really a document by the CDC. It's not my fault you don't like what it says. It just is what it is, right? And so, so I figure I'm making them spend a little bit of time now.
I think it's important to maintain the free market. So, like when you go to the grocery store, and, in Europe, it's illegal to use that data in loyalty cards type of thing. When you go to the grocery store, it seems more like you're just paying a normal price instead of a super duper high price, by using the loyalty card. So that's a little bit nebulous. AT&T or Verizon, not giving you some nickels back because they're using your data. Well, I mean, they could make it cheaper too. And because of
right.
Because of the free market, you can go to a different carrier if you want.
They're all doing the same thing.
Well,
I could change political parties too, but like Tammy said, they're both the parties of corporate culture. There's no other choice. There's no other choice other than corporate culture, right? I've been reading. I think I'm sort of compiling information about a book on the origins of modern thought, right? And you know, I'm reading Gramsci, for example, right?
Uh-huh.
And everything that we think of as just ordinary culture is, you know, and I knew this, and I was very active in, you know, sort of exposing this kind of stuff when I was in college and whatnot. But, you know, having to survive for a living and especially with kids and whatnot, these things sort of start to fade into your background, right? And that's exactly what they want, right? But this, what we consider to be culture, normal life, is manufactured.
Well, it's an illusion in many ways, and it's certainly
And
pandering.
it only, but it's in it. I think it's real, but it's manufactured to only reflect the value system and the preferences of a very narrow range of people. And then that narrow range of people, their assumptions, philosophy, preferences, beliefs, right, become extrapolated to the whole.
It is interesting. I mean, like bank accounts are an interesting thing today. It's you know, it's like it used to be that, you know, money is something that you would count and stuff, and now it's like a number that you kind of know what you're, you know, you got a number somewhere that you know what it could be or should be, and you know, you look at your bank statement or you look at your account, and it's like, oh, yeah, it's the right number, you know, but it doesn't really exist anymore. The concept of money, it's really like it's almost psychological now. I mean, obviously, there's a real number somewhere that they're all banking system, you know, dealing with.
Well, since we went off the gold system, you know, it's all psychological. It's all expectation and projection, right? The futures market, right?
And how many trillions of dollars now is being spent? And I mean, 2 trillion, and then another trillion, and now 3 trillion, or whatever the number is. You know, and where's that money coming from? I mean,
Right.
maybe it's going to be, you know, but does it really matter?
It could come from, I'll tell you where it could come from. It could come from all these superstructures, right, that make money off of us, giving us a little of it back, right? If, you know, I just use the example of Sprint, right? But if you use Sprint and Google and Amazon and Citibank and Walmart and Amazon and Netflix, and if all of those people, all of those technological structures, right, that gather our data, you know, Skype, right, that gather our data and then filter it, right? They could, you know, it's just like blood diamonds, right? They could, you know, our IP addresses, everybody knows our IP addresses, right? That IP address could be nano imprinted into every data unit that we emit, right? Every data bit that we emit could be traceable back to our IP addresses, right?
It is, actually.
Yeah, it is, right? And then they could use that to remunerate us for every time they use our data, right? And that could be the basis. That could be the basis of the guaranteed income that they're talking about. That would be a buffer for populations when things like this happen, right? When nobody can work, right? Or when you get sick and you can't work, right? You have a buffer of income because people, whether you're sick and immobilized in bed, right? Like, unfortunately, you were, Tammy. My father was. He was in a coal mining accident, you know, when he was younger, and 6 months, you know, in the hospital. When you're immobilized like that, you could. The data doesn't become immobilized, right? When you're in the hospital, all the data that they've gathered from you doesn't get parked somewhere. It continues to be functional and be used, right? They could use that as the basis, as a very legitimate basis, right? Because Tammy, regardless of what Tammy's doing right now, everything we've gotten from Tammy, right, is continuing to produce value for us. Thank you, Tammy, right? You know
I do
what
what I can.
But you know what I mean? And then if I can create more value when I'm feeling well and back into the, you know, rhythm, the push and pull of normal social functioning, right? Then I'm producing more, and that's fine, right? But at the baseline, you know, my productivity does not stop because I've become immobilized.
That's true, especially for data.
Yeah. And data gives us the most objective reason to do something like that. Because now you could say that, you could have said that before and said, well, what's your value? Well, I taught my kids that values. And so my kids being productive and, regardless of if I'm immobilized, right? The fact that I educated my children, brought them up properly, and they're doing things that are productive, part of that productivity traces back to me, right?
Well, any one person can be productive under any circumstance, let's say. But you still, if you don't have a factory built, I mean, see, if we have factories that are being run by robots, once we have that, then we can all enjoy the Star Trek economy, where there's free energy. And, if we can figure out a way to make free energy, we'd have this Star Trek economy, I think. But it's easy to say that we don't need to do things when the things are already done, because they are already done. You can go to Goodwill and buy everything. You don't need to manufacture. There's so much junk everywhere. You don't need to manufacture more stuff, except people want some new things because an ad tells them they want something. And so it's this disease. It's a psychological type of warfare that the modern markets are. But at the same token, it's easy to see it that way when everything is already kind of put together. And one thing that these companies could do that would be relatively simple, it would be a little bit diluting, maybe largely, but they could give you stock for using their products, for using their company.
That'd be another way. That would be another way.
Or whatever, piece of a stock. And then if you've been using Google, I mean, Google's one of these things where they do give you something. It's one of the few companies.
I'm sorry, I have to come in and charge. I'll turn my speaker down.
It's one of the few countries where, it's companies. One of the few companies that do give you something for free.
What do they give you?
Because Google is really all about information. So they are the example of the company that's taking all of the information and not paying for it. But what they do is give you information back. You use Google to find out. You can sit all day have Google for free. You can use Google for free. There's the media through YouTube and images, putting music archives from Google that you can get for free. And so there's all kinds of things that Google does give you, and in return, they're actually taking everything from you. But
Right.
That's like a balance.
That's what I was about to say, right? They're taking a lot more than they're giving. The value-wise,
It
right?
seems like that could be true.
Value-wise,
But
they're taking a lot more. Well, you have to be able to use them, right? You have to be able to try to educate yourself to rise above them, right? And use their manipulation to your own benefit.
Right. But they're only getting data from you if you use them.
Right.
So I think the stock idea is this kind of balance between.
The only thing about that, though, is the stock idea you're talking about innovation, right? The stock idea perpetuates the current paradigm, right? The thing about what I was saying is, you're saying sit back and there's no motivation to be productive, right? When everything has been productive. But to me, that's the space that you need in order to have an opportunity to create a new paradigm.
Well, that's
right?
interesting.
You need to have the ability to, remove yourself from the current paradigm and pure transactional value. Like if they were to, like, my model, if they were to remunerate us for our data, not through stock in their company, but just pure value that we can use in whatever way we want. Right.
But that stock you could use. I mean, a stock is
you could liquidate it. You could liquidate it.
That does exist now. That you could do.
It would be much more direct, and they could do it, right? I mean, some places do it, right? Seattle's experimenting with it. Toronto's experimenting with this.
But if you had used, say, if you use Amazon, and by the end of, by the time you retire, if you used Amazon all your life, and by the time you retire, you have enough Amazon stock now.
As a retirement system.
That's an interesting way to look at it. Or they could also just give you some payments.
But you're still just buying into them, right? Yeah, if they give you some kind of payment, then you have the ability to control whether you want to use it for an immediate need or whether you want to use it for you
can liquidate the stock. But I would say that where I completely agree with you is that we have an absolutely unprecedented opportunity to create a new paradigm.
Yes.
And that's why this bullshit is so insidious. You know, it's like, okay, enough is enough. If we're going to create a new paradigm, let's create one, but let's not make it a fascist one.
Yeah, that's not a good idea at all.
And I'm
It's
afraid
not a
that's
new paradigm. That's an old paradigm.
right. It's an old paradigm. So, but this is really the danger, because there's no doubt a new paradigm is being created right now, or at least being attempted to be created.
Right.
Now, in a flu scenario, this whole thing would just kind of be done by June. You know, this is the peak right about now in the flu season, and it would be done by June. It's like half the year is the flu season. Now, it's funny, I really worry that it's going to keep going because of politics. Because you've got two sides, they all have an interest in this. You know, Trump has his interest in it in a way, because maybe he wants to defeat it and be the victor of it, but maybe it's going to suddenly, in the October surprise, become the thing that's going to help him get elected or not be unelected. And the Democrats side, you know, sure enough, could be just gaming this, thinking that this is going to destroy the whole Republican thing. And it sure looks like it's working at this point. The danger, the real wild card I see, I think it's a given at this point that the Democrats are going to take control of the Senate, keep the House, and take the presidency. I think that's a real possibility. I think it's a likelihood at this point, with one exception, like we talked about earlier. What's his name? Amish, the fellow, the congressman,
third party guy, yeah,
the third party guy, who's now a professional. The first time the Libertarians really have a real professional politician is a Republican. He's going to try to pull a Perot against Biden. That's what I think.
Yeah.
And that's the only shot that the Republicans have, I think, of keeping things. Maybe they keep the Senate, maybe they don't. At this point, I think people are so fucking sick of Trump. And whether right or wrong, they're just sick of it. A majority of people have had it up to here with everything that's gone on in the past 4 years. Nothing's black and white. But people, they gave it a shot. Everyone said, hey, let's see what happens. I kind of felt like, hey, I'm curious to see what's going to happen. You know, and now we know what's happened. And I don't want to see another 4 years of it. I really don't. I'm not so sure I really want to see Biden either. You know, Biden is like...
Well, it's the same problem we had. I mean, people didn't want to see Hillary Clinton either. You know what I mean? And that's why, well, you know, we know her, right? We know the family. We don't know what Trump would do. So they put Trump in. Okay, now we know, right?
It's a real shame that someone like Cory Booker, for example,
that's who I
get
liked.
more support.
Yeah.
To get going. Like, he seemed like really reasonable to me. I mean, he had the little, fuck, Newark. He brought Newark, you know, under control. God almighty, you know, like, praise that guy. You know, I mean, it's a small city that had its problems, but, and, you know, he just maybe did some pretty reasonable things or got lucky or whatever. But still, for him to get 0% of everything, never made any sense to me at all. Yeah. And Tammy is a firm believer that, you know, the DNC is totally, you know, driving the bus, and they get to. It's their bus, you know. So that's
the idea behind Sanders too, right? That they kind of shut him out now for the second time, you know, that they just made it so that he would not win.
Right.
Well, I don't know. The first time I believe that. The second time, I think he brought his own lube. It's not about the hunting anymore for him. You know what I mean? Honestly, I liked Sanders the first time. The first time I was all Sanders all the way. I actually registered as a Democrat so I could vote for him in the primary. Well, you know, now he brought his own, you know, then he was like, oh, now all my people who hate fucking Hillary, go vote for her. I said it's okay. Well, okay, you know what? Fool me once, shame on me. I'm not going to get fooled the second time. When he pulled this bullshit again, plus he was acting crazy, but when he did this shit again, I was just like, okay, so let me guess, right? Next election, same thing. You go out, you get a bunch of people up, and then you go, here, go vote for somebody who's absolutely unacceptable.
Can you hear Tammy? Can I kind of hear her through my microphone?
Yeah, I hear her.
Cool. So I just think that you're really onto something with this paradigm change. And I think that's why it's so completely vital that to use the word, that it's the right paradigm.
Well,
And
Hollywood
it's
has
usually
thrown
new,
themselves
right? And
in
we don't relapse into something that we've done before. And that's what happened. That's what people were trying to do in 2016, is do something new and drain the swamp and all of this. But he was a wolf in sheep's clothing, right? He got in on that rhetoric, but he relapsed into something that's even more, regressive than we had previously in the Bush administration, right? When this guy makes Bush look articulate, you gotta.
Well, Bush is articulate. That's the scary thing. You
Well,
wouldn't think
yeah, he became articulate after he left the presidency.
He was pretending he wasn't articulate.
That's what you need to remember. That's what you need to remember, is that he was pretending he wasn't articulate
He was all
the
shucksing
entire
that whole thing.
time. So what might be happening now? Before you buy into, although granted, this guy, he's just got to stop speaking. I'm just never going to go against that. But
one thing that Trump isn't is a politician. And so,
and
but
he's
Biden
not
is.
stupid as much as he is emotional.
But it's
By
not
not
working.
being, but by not being a politician, okay, maybe okay, maybe we need that something, but then he's almost everything that he's done on the macro level has been to undermine the validity and the authority of some of the very basic institutions that we've used to establish our democracy, right? Like education, right? Education is the base, is one of the the foundation stone of liberty, right? Because you have to earn your liberty, and that's something that Obama mentioned in his departure speech, or whatever that speech is called, when he, his last speech as president, kind of thing, right? He's like, democracy is not easy, right? Democracy takes responsibility. Back to the responsibility, topic, right? Democracy takes responsibility. Each individual has to be responsible to educate themselves and to raise their consciousness to the level of being informed about what does it really mean to make this vote or this vote.
I would ask you this, Mario, and maybe you would know. So, because I think that you can't blame the propensity of stupid fucking people that we have today just on what happened in the last 3 years. So I'm going to say that not teaching 1984, that not teaching some of this stuff, that you have to question everything, that these kinds of things also didn't just happen in the last 3 years. This is decades, because you've got people in their 30s that don't understand how a fucking law works. Right?
Well, true,
so
right?
How does that happen? Now, that's been going on for a while, and it didn't get fixed under Obama or Clinton or any of this. So when did we stop teaching important shit like that?
Well, that goes back to the 18th century, my friend.
Well, no, I took civics in school.
No,
you
seriously,
did.
that goes back to the specialization of the educational system, right? As soon as we started creating departments, right, where English language, right, English poetry was taught separately from mathematics, and mathematics was taught separately from biology, and biology was taught separately from, civics, let's say, right? As soon as we separated all those things into special compartmentalized places, right, we began, right, the system that made exploitation of the individual possible on the scale that is culminating in the present time, right? Because prior to education being looked at in these very specific departmentalized areas, right? Philosophy literally means to be a lover of knowledge. Not any particular kind of knowledge, but all knowledge. Right. And understanding the interrelationships of mathematics and literature and civics and biology.
Well, here's one of the scariest things, I think, taking place right now, based on what you're just saying. And I agree completely with what you're saying, based that on the basis that education is core to liberty. But right now, where do people really become educated from? You know, I used to have a lot of books. I had rooms and rooms full of books. I had so many books, and I used to go to the library, right? But guess what? We don't do anymore because we have Google,
Right.
you know, and we have Facebook. And right now, Facebook is where people are getting their information from, in a strange way.
Yeah.
And so, in a very realistic way, however, and Google absolutely in a way. So Google not so much yet, but Facebook whole hog right now is controlling what information is correct.
Well, I mean, Google is too, in the sense that, you know, you can pay money to have your site pop up at the top of a
Absolutely.
Google search for, you know, whatever, right?
Yeah. But those are those ads, you know, you get once you're an experienced Google person, you realize you want to drop below that line to get
Right, exactly.
free.
Exactly. But I mean, even then, you still. I mean, when I talk about research, you know, in my classes, I repeat what is obvious to us, but is increasingly less obvious to generations who are being brought up with Google. You know, which is that, you know, the when you type in, you know, Renaissance art, and you look at the topics that come up, the sites that come up to satisfy that search, you know, a lot of people don't realize that the searches that are at the top are just the most popular ones. They're not necessarily the ones that have the most
It's a very complex algorithm, actually.
solid information, or the most reliable information, most in-depth information, right? It's just the most popular. And so when you think about that, what's popular? Well, what's popular culture, right? Is superficial and you know, not very probing, right? It's just very Rorschach test, single answer, you know, kind of thinking. You have to scroll down. I mean, I tell them, look at every site, you know, look at those sites. Maybe you
There's
find
thousands
something.
of pages.
But it's really, what I tend to find is the sites on the second and the third and the fourth page that are the more interesting sites, you know, if you're really looking for something substantial and intellectually rewarding, you know.
There's a whole paper to be written just by analyzing, making that analysis
Right.
of how the data changes as you go deeper in a Google search.
Right. And there's a certain point where the data become. There's a certain point where the websites become increasingly less relevant.
Right.
And so then there's that, right? If you go too far in the search, it's almost like diminishing marginal returns, right? Like the deeper you go, the better the quality. But then beyond a certain point, the quality starts to go down again, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, you know, it's getting late, but I just want to mention, I want to go back to your concept of the new paradigm. And I think I'm absolutely in love with your idea of the new paradigm. And this is 100% the opportunity to do it. And the question is, how do we facilitate the creation of a new paradigm which is free, based on real knowledge, yet productive and innovating?
Well, I think that's why Aaron Swartz was. Yeah, I have this, you know, intuition that he was killed.
People agree with that.
That he didn't commit suicide, you know, and I think he was. I think he had the mind, you know, that could have addressed that. You know, when I think of other opportunities that we've had for new paradigms, you know, they've all been killed, right? I mean, you know, Martin Luther King, JFK, Robert Kennedy.
The red stamp on the money.
What's that?
The red stamp on the money.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And you know, I think about those four individuals in particular. They would be old by now, but they would still be alive. I mean,
no, except unless they got
right, you know. But I mean, or they, let's put it this way, they would have been alive much longer, that's probably a tautology, right? the self-evidently true. If they hadn't been killed when they were killed, they would have lived longer.
I didn't argue with it.
It's a very deep reasoning, But I mean, they would have been the point is, they would have been influencing policy for decades.
Potentially, absolutely.
Right? I mean, Jimmy Carter, what happened to him? He was made a fool of history. And why? Because he wanted to put in place sustainable energy policies that went against the petroleum industry's financial interest.
Well,
right?
the
He was
Hollywood
made a fool of, right, in history. But he wasn't killed because how could anybody kill Jimmy Carter, right? It's like just kill him.
Yeah. No, I like Jimmy Carter, of course.
Yeah.
What's interesting, a good example of what you're talking about is the Hollywood sign. Hollywoodland originally.
Yeah, I have that on my Facebook page too.
Yeah, so that was a development that was just a couple decades too early. Right. The guy went bankrupt. He built all the infrastructure for the Hollywood Hills, and nobody bought in. They thought it was stupid. 20 years later, everyone wants to move to Hollywood Hills, and everyone made a ton of money, except the guy who did it totally lost his shirt. Right. So this paradigm opportunity, timing is essential.
Right.
And right now, we're seeing that, oil, airlines, which is part of this whole thing in a funny way, and banking system is out. The banking system is in big trouble right now. The banks are in the dirt for several reasons, but this whole thing with giving everyone free money that they're just finding somewhere is going to cause trouble somewhere unless we change the paradigm.
Right.
We're going to have to change the paradigm or suffer the consequences of playing the current game incorrectly.